Well, good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for coming. So today we have the honor of having an early career researcher as our speaker, who I know very well because I was, or I'm still for the moment, her supervisor, and she has already made a number of tremendous achievements. So she just submitted her QUT PhD in marketing for external review. She already published 2 papers during her time as a research student, one of which in the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing, and the other one in the Journal of Retailing and Consumer Services. So today, Kellie Crow is with us today to share her valuable experience and research. And I would like to thank you all for welcoming her.
Alrighty, before we start, I might just do a quick acknowledgement of country. So QUT would like to acknowledge the First Nations owners of the lands where we gather today. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits, and recognize that these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning. QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community, and we'd like to welcome you all from the communities you're joining us from today. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Kellie to begin her presentation.
All right, thanks. So as has been stated, my name is Kellie. It's really nice to be with you all today. So I'm a very late stage PhD candidate in the QUT School of Business and Law. So I'm a marketing PhD student, and basically I have my thesis under review. So I'm hoping to hear back about that in probably mid-November if all goes well. Today, what I wanted to talk to you about, basically, I've planned 4 things for my presentation. So I'm going to go through the findings of some research that I was lucky enough to publish recently in the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing. So that's going to be a fairly standard sort of presentation. You know, what were the methods? What did we do? What did we find? What I'm then going to do is possibly something a little bit different to a lot of presentations. I'm going to walk people through the publication journey. So something that I certainly identified when I was an early stage PhD student is I was told a lot that I had to publish. So I was told that I had to publish or perish. No one really explained what publication would involve, especially regarding the peer review process. So that was something that I really kind of pieced together along the way as I went through it myself. And I think it would be really helpful for earlier stage PhD students to actually get some insight into what the peer review process really involves. So I'll go through the timeline of publishing that paper. I'll talk about some of the setbacks, some of the solutions, basically hopefully give a bit of an overview of what publication is actually, like what it feels like to actually go through. Lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about my PhD journey. This is really just going to focus on talking about some of the setbacks that I had, and then I'm going to give some tips for PhD students for how to kind of overcome some of the basic setbacks. Now, this isn't probably a typical presentation in a sense that it's not for me really just about hyping up myself for my own research. I want to focus on really the messiness of the publication journey. And the reason for that is I think, I just don't think it's talked about enough in academia. So I have this kind of encapsulated in this tweet here. So this tweet was just trying to get people to feel better about their own research. So it says, you know, how the author sees the book, right? And this is a sewing project. We see the behind the scenes aspect. It's very messy versus how the reader sees the book. Right, we have this very perfect, polished, sort of finished product here. Basically, I think that the way that we teach research has this inherent problem where we take really early stage PhD students who've never done research before, who don't understand what the journey is like. And the way that we teach them about research is we have them take already published papers that have been through years and years of development, years and years of polishing. And I think that can really make people feel quite intimidated when it comes to sitting down and actually trying to get their publications off the ground. So what I'm trying to focus on today, right, as I said, is the messiness, the journey, some of the setbacks that I've had, not because I feel in any way badly about my own research. I think it's fantastic research, but I think we just need to be more open about the difficulties that we can experience as PhD students. I know, for example, just from personal experience, I have younger, like earlier stage PhD students come up to me. Often people sound kind of heartbroken or very negative about where they're at in their journey. Like I remember one instance, I was sitting on level 7 at a desk and a friend came in just completely crying, like deeply upset. People with really severe stress, mental health issues, feelings of imposter syndrome. And I think the only way we start to reduce that is if people who are also presenting their successes are honest about the messiness of that journey. So that's what I'm hoping to do today. And I hope that maybe it gives someone just some peace about, you know, how stressful all of this can be. And I hope it makes people not feel as bad about their own journeys if they are also facing any setbacks. All right, so the paper that I'm going to present is called Power and the Tweet, How Viral Messaging Conveys Political Advantage. So obviously I was not the sole author on this paper. I was lucky enough to be a part of a really incredible research team, right? So I had Ashish Galande, Matthew Chylinski, and Frank Mathman also on the research team. So very, very lucky to work with those. And we submitted this paper to a special edition research issue of the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing, right? So very much this journal is about obviously public policy, but increasingly political communication topics in the field of marketing. Now, obviously, I'm going to present the paper, but in a nutshell, basically what we did is we took Twitter data from the official Twitter accounts of the Democratic and Republican parties in the United States, right? So the two main political parties in the US, and we analyzed that data to try to get a sense of what might lead to some content getting more engagement online versus other content. Right, so particularly we did this with reference to differences in political ideology and differences in preferred strategies for goal pursuit among supporters of each of the main political parties. All right, so why did we study this topic? In a nutshell, I think it was really caused ultimately by the 2016 US presidential election. So obviously that election had a huge impact on the world. And what I think it created was this moment of realization and reflection in the marketing literature, where people kind of realized that political marketing was a really important topic. So until then, for whatever reason, I think marketing literature had mostly ignored political communication, right? Certainly in regards to things like virality. And there was definitely a moment of realizing, you know, hey, the way that we communicate is having a profound impact on the world. It's impacting who's winning elections, what's creating our public policy, and really impacting our everyday life. So among this was a growing interest in, I think, topics on right, viral communication. So for example, an increasing awareness of polarization and how that impacts communication. Clearly, people of different ideologies have very different ways of communicating both to each other and to their own, for example, in-groups. And I think there was an awareness that these differences were very interesting. And there was also clearly sort of an awareness that some content was becoming much more successful in the political arena than other content. And I think a lot of people were really taken by surprise by that. All right, so there was an understanding that somehow we'd missed this really important context, more research needed to be done. And around the time that I started being a PhD student, there were a few special edition issues. So I think there were 2 or 3 at the time. And thankfully, we realized we could submit to one of them. So from a practical standpoint, we were very motivated by this increase in interest in the topic. From a theoretical standpoint, I think one of the key motivations was just an obvious gap in the theory. So it was quite obvious that established factors that had been examined as drivers of content virality weren't really going to do very well at explaining virality in a political context, right? So for example, researchers like Jonah Berger, researchers like the editors of the special edition issue that we were submitting to, had, for example, shown that high arousal content is likely to go viral. So if you're posting a video to YouTube about a well-constructed bookcase, probably not going to go as viral as footage of somebody getting a puppy, right? So high arousal content is really important. The other thing that we know from marketing research that is important is tie strength between the speaker and the audience, right? So if the speaker and the audience are close, if they have a long-term relationship, that should mean that the audience shares something from the speaker. But if you think about these two factors in a political context, right, having conversations about things like abortion or immigration or gun control, already very likely to be high arousal content. Despite this, one person's post on gun control gets 0 notes. One person's, post on gun control goes viral, right? So the established factor doesn't explain why something's doing better than another at getting engagement. Same thing with tie strength. Both the Democrats and the Republicans have, their parties have been around for a very long time, arguably about a century in their current form. You don't turn on the news without hearing from political parties, or at least their representatives. So we know that people have tie strength between them, and yet always at some point, one team kind of wins an election and the other one doesn't. And a lot of that is about how far their content can spread. So we know that established factors from marketing theory just don't do a good job at explaining virality in a political context. So based on that, we kind of asked ourselves 2 very broad questions, right? Why does some political social media content get more sharing than other content? How can an examination of such content inform existing research on virality? Now, in order to study this, we brought in a theory called regulatory mode theory. If you were one of Frank's research students, you would be familiar with this theory. Probably if you have a friendship with one of Frank's research students, you would also have heard of it. But for the uninitiated, regulatory mode theory is all about how people pursue their goals. So it holds that there are things called regulatory mode orientations, and these are just preferred strategies for how people pursue their goals. Now, we reasoned that regulatory mode theory would be highly relevant to political marketing, right, to the political context, because politics is a very goal-directed arena, right? So we have expectations for public policy, right, for things that will happen after, we participate in politics. Right, so the fact that the theory was also related to goals, we felt was quite relevant. Now, the first regulatory mode orientation is referred to as locomotion. So people who are high on locomotion are all about initiating action towards a goal. So it often gets summed up in the Nike maxim, just do it. If you're high on locomotion, you want to be starting towards a goal. You want to be sustaining movement towards that goal. Right, so it's very much about achieving a goal, and people high on locomotion are often quite focused on the future. They often have a positive conceptualization of change, heightened commitment to change, and a heightened ability to cope with it. The other regulatory mode orientation is referred to as assessment. Now, assessment is about making comparisons, so it's about choosing the right course of action to achieving a goal. People who are high on assessors don't want to start chasing a goal. They want to often delay movement towards a goal to figure out which is the best path forward. Now, assessors often have quite a nostalgic focus, right? So they think a lot about past behavior as a guide to figuring out what they should do in the present and what they should be doing in the future. Now, if you know anything about political ideology, you might have noticed that there is potentially a relationship between these regulatory mode orientations and the main ideologies that we have right in the West. So for left-leaning ideology typically espouses comfort in movement away from the past, right? Acceptance of change to social hierarchies, and that requires initiation of action to produce change, right? So as part of our theoretical work, we reasoned that that would necessitate a locomotion orientation, right? So action towards achieving that goal of change. The other thing that we focused on probably a bit more in the theory work in the paper was conservative ideology. So conservative ideology has quite a focus on the past, right? Scrutiny about courses of action to create change, right? So that wariness of change creates a desire to be critical of it, right? To make comparisons, basically as a way to delay that change. So we necessitated that that would foster a strong assessment orientation among conservatives. So we presented 3 studies in the paper. For brevity reasons, I'm only going to talk about 2 of them. So I have a QR code that will take you to the paper if you would like some more detail. But as a relatively brief overview, we first presented a pretest. So we collected all of the inaugural addresses of all US presidents from Roosevelt in 1933 to Donald Trump in 2016. So this was about the part in history where the parties first came to be as they generally are now. We analyzed that data right, by using a dictionary that was created for regulatory mode. So for example, we had a bag of words for locomotion, so words like move, change, do, go, and we had a bag of words for assessment, truth, careful, regret as an example. And in line with our reasoning, we found that Republican presidents had a higher average proportion of assessment predominant language than Democratic presidents, which was great. And then we also did our main study. So here we collected tweets from all of the official, from the official Twitter handles of the Democratic and Republican parties on Twitter. So that was from the point where the accounts were created up until we collected data in 2019. All right, so this left us with about 55,000 tweets. We again analyzed that data using the regulatory mode dictionary. We found that tweets from the Republicans were more likely to be assessment language predominant than Democratic tweets, and mediated through the use of assessment language, tweets from the Republican Party were generating more retweets than tweets from the Democrats. So basically, in conclusion, right, we found that in line with our theorizing about the relationship between political ideology and goal pursuit language, Republican politicians used more assessment language than Democrats, and that assessment predominant language led to more sharing. All right, so in looking at this, we were able to generate some novel ideas about how and why content goes viral, right? So why content is shared. And by looking at the alignment between political ideology and goal pursuit language, we were able to make those contributions to the research on virality as well. So our recommendations were basically that when you're trying to engage in some form of political debate, whether that be with someone from your same political ideology or someone from a different political ideology, it's good to try to be aware of differences in those political ideologies and goal pursuit language. If you can try to align your use of goal pursuit language with political ideologies, you'll hopefully find more engagement. Hopefully that can help you have a better conversation. So as I said, that was a very brief overview of the paper. I have a reference to it here if you would like that. I also have a QR code that can take you to the paper itself. I will present that QR code at the end of the presentation as well. What I want to talk about now is the journey that we took from creating the ideas of that paper until the point where it was actually published online. So again, the point of this is, I think more people should be talked about what the steps of the peer review process is before they're going through it. So what I'm presenting here is basically the steps of the peer review process, very specifically for a special edition issue. Right, so compared to a lot of submissions, this probably represents a quicker timeline than a lot of people will experience. And what I like about this example is it's probably an example of the peer review process working in its ideal form. So throughout the publication, we were really lucky to have people who were, actually reading the paper, right? They were paying attention to what we were writing, and they were helping us make the project better. So hopefully this can give you a bit of guidance on a good example of the peer review process. All right, so the timeline started in 2019. So this was the first year of the project. This was the first year that I was a PhD student. I don't remember exact dates for this year because it was a while ago, but basically towards the start of the year, I was doing a lot of reading on the political ideology literature or the political psychology literature. So that was for a PhD thesis topic that I had. And at some point, I think I was just looking at what was happening in different journals, and I noticed a call for submissions to a special edition issue at the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing. The deadline was for January 2020. So at that point, I thought there's about a year, right? Possibly I can put some kind of project together and submit. That might be a nice idea. I told my supervisor about it. He agreed. He reached out to his former supervisor, who also was interested in the project. And then Matthew brought another person onto the project, right? So very quickly we were able to form a team. I think everyone was quite interested in the subject matter, which was really nice. And the other thing about a special edition issue is the reviewers are kind of forced to get back to you pretty quickly. So it was hoped that because the reviewers and the editors, I should say, had a compressed timeline, they would hopefully kind of not string us along. We would hopefully get a sense pretty quickly of whether the project was going to be successful. So we figured, let's put something together. Now, in the kind of second quarter of that year, we tested an initial project. So originally we had a different project idea using a different theory. When we analyzed the data using a dictionary from that theory, it basically, because it wasn't created to be used on Twitter data, we realized that it just wouldn't work, right? So unfortunately, we had a setback early on where we just didn't know if we would be able to put a thing together. I think for a little bit, it wasn't even clear if we had a project, right? So I wasn't sure if it would even continue. Thankfully, it did. Right, so we had the idea of moving to regulatory mode theory. We tested that. Our initial hypotheses were supported, so it was great. We had a viable project. This was fantastic. But this happened quite late in the year, right? If you remember, the deadline was for early January. Basically, we had to very quickly put together the initial write-up, which we did. When we met, however, we kind of realized it wasn't going to do the job, right? So the initial write-up wasn't great at communicating the value of the theory. We hadn't done a great job, for example, with relevance to practitioners and things like that. So we really knew that we would have to improve. And we kind of realized we didn't have a lot of time to do that. Right, so what we did was apply for an extension. And at this point in my career, I didn't even know that that was possible. So that kind of blew my mind. I had always assumed that deadlines with journals were just completely concrete. But actually we emailed them and we said, we really want to put together a submission here. We just need a little bit more time. We think this would be a great opportunity for feedback. And they were really lovely about it. They gave us an extra month, right? So that was fantastic. We started the rewrite of the paper. This took us into 2020, right? So thankfully we made that first submission. That was fantastic. And they got back to us with an invitation to resubmit in August. So if you're very early in your PhD journey, what happens is you submit. If they don't reject you straight away, which is called a desk rejection, they will hopefully give you an invitation to address some feedback and resubmit at a later date, which is what they did, right? So they gave us an August deadline. They noted that they were major revisions, and they were quite major revisions. As you can imagine, how we put the paper together very quickly, needing an extension. We didn't do the best job at a lot of things, so the paper needed a lot of work. And they noted that it was a risky resubmission at the time, right? So I remember reading that and feeling that that was a bit stressful. But that's definitely something that happens. Now, as I said, I think this was an example of peer review working in its ideal form. So we had 3 reviewers, they all really knew their stuff. We had one on theory, one on method, one on communication. They clearly read the paper, they gave fantastic feedback. And I think just as an early career researcher, it was really lucky for me just to be a part of that, because I think I had a really great example of how to improve the paper. And then we made the second resubmission in August, so we added more data to replicate our initial findings. We had really major changes to how we communicated our theory, the importance of the research. I think the discussion section like completely changed, right? So we had a huge overhaul of the paper, right? It was a lot of work. As I said, it made the publication way better. By October, they'd gotten back to us, right? So a second invitation to resubmit, this time by December. This time we had 2 reviewers, one largely on theory and method. Sometimes that can happen in the review process. So the reviewers that you have from one revision to another mightn't be exactly the same, right? Again, that's fine. They called this a minor revision, which was really great. That was less stressful, although they still asked us to do quite a lot of things. So it didn't necessarily feel minor, but the fact that they obviously felt very positively about the paper was really good, right? So by December, we'd added more data. We did further changes to how we communicated, right, about the paper. That brought us into 2021, right? So by early January, they gave us a conditional acceptance. That was really cool. I'd never had a conditional acceptance before, so that was a new experience for me. They asked for some presentation changes. We submitted. They came back with another conditional acceptance wanting more presentation changes. And then by early February, we had the full acceptance. So from the point where we started, right, in early 2019 to here, right, that was about 2 years, and it was less than 2 years of active research, so maybe a year of active research time. One thing that I would flag to earlier PhD students, the work doesn't stop when you get your full acceptance, right? So often there's a lot of paperwork at this point. I remember I had to fill out a promotional material form, right? So how would I talk about the findings on social media? I put a lot of effort into this. I went to my supervisor. I said, do you want to take a look at that? And he was like, no one really uses these. So that was kind of funny. And it was truthful. I filled it out. I don't think they ever paid any attention to it, which was interesting. And then the other thing you kind of have to do at this point is the final manuscript proofs. Now, this is a really cool kind of moment. So what happens is they send you a link, you log into their system, and you get to see your paper for the first time looking like an actual paper. So until then, it's a PDF or a Word document. It looks real at that point, which is lovely. You'll do some final editing to make sure it works in their software. And that's when the work actually finishes. So early February, we did that. Late February, the article was posted online as kind of a preprint. And then by August, the special edition issue was released. And I kind of learned about that because I realized I'd been cited, which was really cool to realize that that had happened. Right, so to recap, probably took us about 18 months. Plenty of setbacks along the way, but also I think that was hopefully a really, an example of a really good version of the peer review process. Now, the other thing I'm going to talk about was my PhD journey, which hopefully from the images you can tell maybe didn't go as well as the publication journey. Right, so year 1, like everyone else, I did stage 2. I did initial data collection and some hypothesis testing. I found that that project did not work, right? So hypotheses weren't supported. That topic had been in the same field as my master's, right? So I was an expert on the topic. All of the theory pointed to that topic working, didn't work. Basically had to throw out a year's worth of research. Absolutely happens to PhDs. Year 2, I applied for an extension for confirmation. I found a new topic and did my confirmation document in like 6 weeks. Past confirmation, I did hypothesis testing for the work I presented at confirmation. Also didn't work, had to change to a side project. And thankfully that project did work. So I didn't really even know my thesis topic until towards the end of year 2. Year 3, right, spent the whole year working on the project. It went pretty well. Needed some thesis rewrites, however, so that required an extension for final seminar. Year 4, so that's this year, final seminar submission and presentation. Again, I needed major revisions, right? So I needed to extend my scholarship. I did work replicating and rewriting my thesis. And thankfully, I was finally able to submit for external revision in July, right? So I currently have my thesis under review. Hopefully they'll get back to me by mid-November. Really the point of sharing some of the setbacks that I have is I hope that no one in like being an early PhD student thinks they're the only one going through this. I certainly talked to lots of other PhD students who I think experienced way more setbacks than I did. So please, if you are an early PhD student and you're feeling stressed about it, please remember everyone goes through this. It's perfectly normal. If you're feeling really stressed, please reach out to someone, preferably a peer, right? An older PhD student is always a great person to talk to, right? We've all been through this. Most people are happy to help, at least commiserate, even if we can't offer specific advice, right? So just to summarize, something's going to fail at some point, right? Something is going to break. Everyone's going to go through a setback. So please don't feel like you're a bad researcher just because you're going through one. Happens to everyone, just literally everyone, right? Remember that you can often ask for extensions. I think looking back, I put myself through a lot of stress that I didn't really need to. I probably could have reduced a lot of stress if I'd asked for more extensions. Remember that milestones and resubmissions aren't about achieving perfection, right? You want to get your research to the best position you can before you submit, but when you submit, they will find something to give you feedback on anyway. So the reason why we go through peer review is about getting that feedback because it helps us. Research projects evolve. I've always been kind of blown away by how much work changes in a single project, right? Whatever you're submitting for confirmation, right, is not what you're going to be submitting for final seminar, right? And that's a good thing. It makes the projects better. More senior PhD students are invaluable sources of support. So I remember when I was early in my PhD, I heard a lot of people stressing the importance of peer support, and peer support is invaluable. Please remember to try to form relationships, not just with people in your same year level, right? So the people who commenced at the same time with you, reach out to the slightly more senior PhD students. They're typically really, really useful for things like sending examples of applications for ethics and things like that, right? So don't forget about the more senior ones. And the other thing that I would say to the junior PhDs, you don't have to say yes to a project, right? Everyone, right? All PhD students are really valuable to more senior academics, right? You'll be offered research assistant work, you'll be offered tutoring, you'll be offered side projects. You don't have to say yes. Make sure you're accepting projects that are really useful for you. And if you need to protect your time and your work-life balance, that's something that you're able to do. So it's fine to say no. You don't always have to say yes when you are offered something. So thank you for listening all the way through to the end there. Again, my name's Kelly. My email is there if you would like to contact me about anything. Love to connect with you on LinkedIn. And I have a QR code for the paper that I presented as well.